I got engaged to a blind Duke. Episode 160. Ha. Cough. A metallic sound came from his throat because he hadn't used it for so long. His voice returned before his fingers, and then his fingers began to twitch. The moment his fingers moved, other bodily sensations began to creakily return. From his fingers to his arms, from his toes to his thighs, from his waist to his neck. The stiffened nerves came alive as if stretching. When he carefully opened his eyes, sunlight breaking through large tree leaves was clearly visible. Since he still couldn't hear sounds, it seemed like what he experienced from the poison was reversing in order. Though it was disappointing that he couldn't hear Marin's voice right away, his heart fluttered just from the fact that he could see her now. Gerald slowly raised his upper body. The muscles that had stiffened from long disuse screamed in protest. Marin had massaged his body daily while telling him stories. Thanks to her efforts, his body didn't feel much discomfort considering how long he hadn't been able to move. Gerald pushed aside the tree leaves and slowly went outside. As he looked around, his eyes met directly with the demon beast rabbit. He could see the demon beast rabbit's eyes widen round upon discovering him. His gaze moved to what was in front of the demon beast rabbit. Several things presumed to be chickens were being roasted. He didn't know how long he had been lying down, but had the world changed? A demon beast cooking and eating meat? When he moved his gaze back to the demon beast rabbit in bewilderment, the rabbit snorted and focused on roasting the meat. In fact, it was already surprising that they were this close to a demon beast without attacking each other. Gerald awkwardly turned his gaze away and looked around to find Marin. If he could hear sounds, he would immediately know where Marin was. Should he ask the demon beast rabbit? However, he wasn't Marin. He didn't know how to converse with demon beasts. It was when Gerald was staring at the rabbit with a troubled expression. Gerald? Marin unconsciously dropped the water pouch she had brought. The Duke had awakened. Marin wondered if she might be seeing things, so she rubbed her eyes with both hands and slowly opened them. The Duke was still standing before her. This isn't a dream. The Duke couldn't hear her voice, as he was looking down at Bunny Bunny. Gerald! Marin shouted with all her might and joy, but the Duke only looked at Bunny Bunny with a serious expression. Could it be that he can't hear? Marin deliberately made loud footstep sounds as she ran to him. If it were the Duke who was sensitive to sounds, he would have already turned around. Marin jumped straight into the Duke's arms. The Duke froze as if startled, but soon she felt his body softly relax. Marin. Gerald. Marin looked up at the Duke with eyes full of tears. Their eyes met in the air. His gray eyes held her completely. Fortunately, his sight seemed to be working well. Marin felt a little relieved as she buried her face deep in his embrace again. Marin, show me your face. I can't hear right now. Marin hurriedly wiped away her tears. As she lifted her face from his embrace, she smiled brightly so her sad emotions wouldn't be detected. You already know, don't you? The Duke asked tenderly as he carefully brushed her fallen hair back. Marin was so choked up that she couldn't answer, just pressed her lips together tightly and then nodded her head greatly so he could see. I'm sorry I can't hear your voice. Marin spoke slowly with exaggerated mouth movements. You'll get better soon. He looked at her lips intently with regretful eyes, then shook his head slightly. I don't know what you're saying. Everything else is fine, but my hearing hasn't returned yet. But it'll come back soon, so don't worry. Marin didn't want to worry him, so she forced herself to smile even brighter and nodded again. He gently held her chin and met her eyes again. It's enough that I can see you like this. A wonderful smile spread across his face. Since other parts have healed, you'll be able to hear sounds soon too. She spoke vigorously with eyes full of tears. If only she were the one who couldn't hear, then she could read his lips. Thank you. For all the stories you told me. Did you hear them? Gerald looked carefully at the shape of her mouth, but still couldn't understand. So he continued with what he had wanted to say while lying down. I felt like I was trapped alone in a dark place, but your voice led me to a bright place. Without you, I wouldn't have been able to wake up. Gerald, you are my everything. Marin nodded greatly, then stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. Since he couldn't hear, she expressed herself through actions. Gerald's eyes widened as he had never even dreamed that she would kiss him first. This lovely woman always exceeded his expectations. Marin. Marin nodded in response instead of answering. Before I met you, I was always alone. Sadness gathered in her trembling light green eyes. Don't be sad. Since I met you, I'm no longer alone. Marin pulled up the corners of her mouth and nodded strongly. Gerald held her face and slowly lowered his lips. Soon he vividly felt the soft sensation. He had been a loner. Always alone to the point where he didn't even know what loneliness was. Marin had jumped into that life of his. Her voice had guided him when he couldn't see. Since falling in love with her, he had worked solely to earn her love. Now that he couldn't hear, her expressions would become his signpost. My love, my life's savior. Countless emotions arose in his chest, but there was only one word he could say. I love you. Gerald slightly parted his lips and whispered while looking into her clear eyes. That was the moment. Beep with sudden tinnitus, surrounding noises came flooding in explosively. The sound of birds chirping. The sound of grass rustling in the wind. The sizzling sound of meat cooking. The sound of a heart beating rapidly. Gerald momentarily squeezed his eyes shut. Gerald, are you all right? Even among all the noise, her voice was heard most clearly. When Gerald could hear her voice again, he hugged her with all his might in overwhelming emotion. I love you too. To be able to hear her voice like this was truly a blessing. The Duke tilted his head slightly and lowered his lips. His kiss was respectful and gentle. Marin lost herself completely in him. Marin, who had barely parted her lips, met his gray eyes. Gerald. Let's go home now. Then a deep smile formed on his face. Yes. Let's go. To our home. Could it be? I can hear you now. Marin threw herself into his arms with a joyful expression. Thank goodness. Now let's go to the Duke's castle. To our home.